Welcome to the weekly podcast of Adventure Church. We're glad you're joining us. Listen in as Pastor Anthony shares his heart and God's vision for the community.
Hey, listen, before we jump in, I just during worship, God brought me to this passage in Luke chapter 18. And Jesus is entering Jericho, and there's a blind man that's sitting on the roadside. And he's begging, and he's in desperate need. There's some brokenness in his life. He can't see. And I get this picture in my mind that here he is in this brokenness, but he's sitting on soil of one of the greatest revival moments in all of history. In one of the moments where God's people needed some walls to fall. And so here he is centuries later, and he's on the soil of revival, but he's sitting in his brokenness. And sometimes when you're in your brokenness, it's easy to forget the things that God has done. It's easy to forget that God is still able, and God is still a God of the impossible. But the good thing is that Jesus was passing by. And as he began to cry out, Jesus takes heed of his brokenness. And this is what I feel like the Lord is saying. For some of you came tonight and you're in that place. You're blinded in some areas. And there's some brokenness. But you are sitting on the soil of revival. You are sitting on the very soil. If you don't know what revival is, it means when God takes something that's dead and he brings it back to life. God takes something that's broken and he heals it. And so tonight, if you would just open up your heart and realize that, man, listen, God sees your brokenness and he's not going to pass you by. But I need to remind you that you are on soil of impossibility. You are in soil. You are sitting on soil of something that God is doing in this city, in the spirit, in this region. And so just brace yourself and prepare your hearts, because listen, you may have forgotten that God is able to do some great things. You may have lost sight, and it may be really painful right now, but he hasn't lost sight of you, and he's passing by tonight. So blind eyes are going to open. The deaf are going to hear, and the broken are going to be restored in Jesus' name. Amen. Amen. Awesome. Oh, yes, the last time would be awesome. Thank you. Well, how you doing, Adventure Church? Yeah. Listen, man, we are so excited to be here tonight, and I don't say that lightly, because we don't take this lightly. I know that Pastors Anthony and Mandy guard this pulpit like the White House, and so we take it really seriously, and I got to tell you this, and I don't know if I said this before. Thank you so much, Pastor Mandy. I don't know if I said this before, but you know, I don't like to speak a lot of Christianese. And so when I tell you that your pastors are two of our most favorite people on the planet, I mean that from the bottom of our hearts. It's not because we're supposed to say that or I'm supposed to say it. But even over this last year, they've been incredible friends, pastors, mentors to us. But God has used them in our life personally, not just with our church, but personally to walk in new levels of freedom. And because how many of you guys know, even as a pastor, God is still working on you. And so it's just such an honor to be here tonight. So guys, thank you from the bottom of our hearts. We're excited to be here. And I can't go any further without shouting out my beautiful wife. Where are you, boo? There she is in the back with a baby strapped to her. And that's our newest addition to the family. So she's 6 months. I got 3 girls. And we do ministry as a family. And so when we were contemplating, because our girls are a little bit sick, and we're like, man, should they come down? We said, man, we do this together. And so shout out to you, boo, because I know the journey was rough, but we made it. So listen, if you guys have your Bibles, open them up to Matthew chapter 20. Matthew chapter 20, I want to read a passage to you. Matthew chapter 20, starting in verse 20. I switched up my message because I felt like God wanted me to switch it up. So I really believe this is a word for somebody tonight. Matthew chapter 20, starting in verse 20, says this. Then the mother of Zebedee's sons came to Jesus with her sons, kneeling down and asking him for a favor. What is it you want, he asked. She said, She said, grant that one of these two sons of mine may sit at your right and the other at your left in your kingdom. You don't know what you're asking, Jesus said to them. Can you drink from the cup that I am about to drink from? We can, they answered. Jesus said to them, you will indeed drink from my cup, but to sit at my right or left is not for me to grant. These places belong to those for whom they have been prepared by my Father. Verse 24 says, when the 10 heard about this, they were indignant with the other two brothers. And Jesus called them together and said, you know how the rulers of the Gentiles lord it over them? Their high officials exercise their authority over them. Not so with you. Instead, whoever wants to become great among you must become your servant. And whoever wants to be first, somebody say first, must be last or must become your slave. Just as the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve and give his life as a ransom for many. I want to speak to you tonight from the subject of built to last. Built to last. Look at your neighbor and say, built to last. Look at your second choice and say, built to last. Built to last. You guys like that one? It's amazing to me that there are some things in life that as we go through life, we've said this phrase about at least a few things. We say those things, we say that phrase, they don't make them like they used to. Anybody ever say that as you're hitting on your refrigerator? They don't make them like they used to. Now let me show you a picture of a light bulb. Now this is a special light bulb. It's called the Centennial light bulb. And it's been burning for 113 years. And it resides in my city, which is awesome. I've never went to see it, but I'm pretty impressed by the fact that it's been burning. I mean, who goes to see a light bulb, right? That's been burning 113 years constantly. How many of you guys know they don't make them like they used to?
They don't make them like they used to.
Let me show you another picture. This is a vacuum. It's 108 years old.
Whoa.
Still sucking up dust. 108. We have a little joke at our church. We have what we like to call the vacuum ministry because those things are breaking all the time. And so we have like vacuums everywhere all over the church, and it's crazy. It drives everybody nuts. But it's 108 and still sucking up dust. Man, they don't make them like they used to.
They don't make them like they used to.
But there's some things that they're just built to last. Let me show you another picture of something that's built to last. Come on, somebody.
Yeah.
Woo! I feel right at home.
Yeah.
Regardless of an injury, they're still built to last. Now there's some things that they're just not built to last, right? There's some things that we do every single day that they're just not built to last. Let me show you a picture of these guys. Chocolate chip cookies. Come on, somebody going through the Christmas season, you know these guys were not built to last. Do you know we consume 1.9 million of these guys a year? Something crazy like that. 1.9 million a day. I was thinking as I was driving over here, I'm like, man, we are not going to die from ISIS. We're going to die because we're eating too many cookies. That is just real talk. But some things just aren't built to last. There's one more I want to show you just aren't built to last, and I think you guys will appreciate this. They're just not built to last. Now, some of you United fans may be saying, hey, Raiders, you know, they lose a lot. But we're still standing. We are still standing. Some of you guys are like, hold on, are you going to preach a message or what's going on? But isn't it true? Look at I say, Niners, you guys lose your minds. Come on back. So isn't it true, though, that I think many times we're so concerned with our tech, our technology, our appliances, our sports teams. Why we want to make sure these things are built to last, our motor vehicle. And so we seem to be concerned a lot about these things, but not so concerned about our relationships. Because the truth is, as you look in the United States of America, statistics tell us that our relationships are no longer built to last. They're no longer in a position where they're thriving. In fact, when you just look at marriage statistics today, I want to show you a few. You know, the average marriage lasts about 8 years now. And you know, in some places, they have like 3-year agreements. Like, we're going to try this out for 3 years, and if it doesn't work, sorry, we're good. We'll part, you go your way, I'll go my way. Now, before I jump into this, listen, if you've been through a divorce or you're dealing with some abuse, by no means, don't let the enemy put any condemnation on you today, because how many of you guys know God works from this day forward? So don't start going sideways on me. God, he works from this day forward. And if you're in an abusive relationship, by no means am I saying suck it up and just deal with it. But what I am saying is we have to take a look at our relationships, because no longer do they look like they're built to last. Now, the average marriage lasts about 8 years. That is, and then let me paint the picture for you. That is every 36 seconds a marriage ends in divorce. Every 36 seconds. That is 2,400 a day. That is 16,800 a week, and 876,000 per year. And they said the number one reason is communication. That's the number one reason why relationships kind of go south. What about friendships? They say that the average friendship today lasts only about 7 years. What about, this one really broke my heart. I know that's not said of this church, but that the average relationship that a person will have with the church will only last about 7 years. And so as I was looking at all these stats, I started to ask myself, like, man, why is this happening? And one of the things that they said is a common thread woven throughout the fabric of all of these is that needs aren't being met. Everyone communicates, my needs aren't being met. And everyone also communicated that if the other person would have tried, or would have tried harder, then maybe I would have stayed, I would have stuck around. But the problem is everybody was saying that. So everybody's saying, well, if they would have tried harder, and they're saying, well, if you would have tried harder, and everybody's kind of doing this on a tug of rope, trying to get their way and get their needs met, and it just doesn't work. And it's a broken system. It's a broken system. Because the truth is that God has a way of doing things, and God's way is always built to last, but the world also has a way of doing things, and it doesn't work. You see, when you look at, like, some of you might, right now, you may be thinking, but I got needs. I mean, I too have needs. And I need God to meet my needs. I need God to do something for me, and I need people to serve and to fulfill these different aspects in my life, and I got needs, and I get it, and there's nothing wrong with that. But the world has a way of meeting those needs, and look what it says in 1 John chapter 2. He says this. He says, don't love, and I'm going to read to you in the Message version. I love how it's broken down here. He says, don't love the world's ways. Don't love the world's goods. Because the love of the world squeezes out the love of the Father. Practically everything that goes on in the world, now watch this, wanting your own way, wanting everything for yourself, wanting to appear more important, has nothing to do with the Father. In fact, it just isolates you from Him. The world and all of its wanting is on the way out. But whoever does what God wants is set for eternity. And so John is telling us that there's this vivid reality that the way that the world operates, it doesn't work. It's not built to last. But at the very same token, that there's a way that God has instituted things. There's a system that God has put into place, and not only will it set us up here in this life, but it will take us all the way throughout eternity. Now I have to paint kind of a quick picture, because as you guys are wrestling with some of your needs, and you guys are wondering, like, well, what do I do with my needs? I mean, this person's not fulfilling this, or this relationship is not fulfilling this aspect, and sometimes you even feel like that with God. Like, come on, God, like, I have these needs, and let me just validate that. Like, there's nothing wrong with having needs. We all have needs. We all have desires. We all have things that we want to do. But something happens when those needs start to get dysfunctional, when those needs start to get unhealthy, when all of a sudden our needs, we can't help but to think about all of the time, every single day, and they become really selfish, really self-centered. It's in that place that our needs or those desires start leading us into an unhealthy place. And so as you're thinking about that, see, the world would say, hey, listen, you got needs, and the world will validate those needs. And so what the world does is they say, because of those needs, you have to go and get yours. Go and get it. Do whatever you can to be first. Do whatever you can to put yourself in that top position. Do whatever you can to make sure that those needs that you so desire are met. Be first. But the problem is the world's way, it just doesn't work.
Right.
And that's something that we kind of all know, but the truth is it doesn't last. You say, well, why is that? I mean, that just seems logical. If I have needs and I got to put myself in a position to try to get those needs met, and if this person isn't meeting my needs or this relationship isn't working out in my life, and this could be across. I'm not just talking about marriages. I'm talking about families. I'm talking about friendships. I'm talking about your life as a single.
Yeah.
And so like if that seems the most logical to put myself in that position, then how come it doesn't work? And if you're taking notes, I want you to jot a couple things down if you would. Is it doesn't work is because when we start to fight for first, like the world tells us, we start to use our relationships in an unhealthy manner, right? We start to use our relationships to get for pleasure, for power, for prestige, for prominence. We start to use people in a very, very unhealthy way. And I'm hoping that as we dive into this passage tonight, that God is going to speak something to us that's going to change the whole outlook as we enter into this new year on what it looks like for things to really be first. Or what it looks like in the context of our relationships as we enter into this new year. I want us to really grasp this, and I think this passage is going to help us understand how do we enter into this new year so it's not like before. And God, what do you want to do in the midst of my relationships? And so let me give you a little bit of background on this passage that we're diving into. Jesus is at an all-time high. I mean, his ministry is taking off. His popularity is soaring. His influence is dominating. Miracles are happening. And you got to kind of put yourself in this position because the disciples, they spent most of their life on the backside of Galilee, kind of in obscurity. But now they have a little bit of a platform. Right? Like Jesus is gaining some momentum, miracles are happening, and everybody's like, oh, you guys are with Jesus? And so as they're walking down the road one day, Peter looks at Jesus and he says, hey, Jesus, man, we've given up a lot to follow you. Like, what's in it for us? And I love the Lord because he doesn't get upset at Peter's question. In fact, he answers it, and the answer probably blew Peter's mind because Jesus said, you know what? For everybody who has given up everything for me, everything that a person has given up to follow me, he said, I'm going to reward them 100 times in my kingdom. Matter of fact, you're going to rule and reign with me forever. And so you kind of get this picture that Jesus is answering this question, but James and John, they're listening. And so they're like, 100 times? Ruling and reigning? And so all of a sudden, they say, man, we need to position ourselves for success. We need to put ourselves in the front. We need to make sure that we're first because we got some needs. We have some needs that need to be fulfilled. And so what do? They do what any of us would have done, right? They use their mom.
Come on.
How are you going to use your mama?
Yeah.
And they say, hey, Mom, so do you think you can put a little word in Jesus for us? And, we're trying to get that spot. We want to make sure that we get that 100 times. We want to make sure we're ruling and reigning with him on this earth. And so in the context of this ancient culture, it makes sense. Because aged women in the Jewish culture, there was really a sense of what do you call it? Such a sense of respect for them. Like they could ask questions that nobody else would dare ask. They could get away with things that men wouldn't dare thinking of doing. They could ask some questions that a man would never do. So she goes up to Jesus, and this is what she says, picking up in verse 21. She said this. She says, Lord, I want to ask you a little favor. She said, would you grant that one of these two sons of mine may sit at your right and the other at your left in your kingdom? Come on, Jesus, like, hook me up. Now the plot thickens, because what we understand from scripture is this is Mary's sister. So she got a little hookup. That would make James and John Jesus' cousins. So you know how that works. They're like, come on, cousin. Like, put me on. Like we're family. Like this, hook us up. And that's what we do a lot of times when we operate in the world's ways. When we try to fight for first, we'll end up using our relationships to position us in a more profitable way. We'll use our relationships to position us in a way that we think our needs are going to be met and fulfilled. Now, let me bring this a little bit closer to home. So my wife, Jackie, and I, as you guys know, we got 3 little girls. Now, my second child, her name is Abigail. And we took her to the doctor to get her routine shots. And the doctors always tell us the same thing. It's okay with their vaccines. They're not going to get sick. They're not going to get a fever. We're like, yeah, right. They always get sick every time we vaccinate our kids, right? They always get sick. They always end up with a fever. And so as the story goes, she woke up about 4 times in the middle of the night that night with a fever. Now, I'm exhausted. I get up every single time. My wife is pregnant. So, I'm up at every single cry. And then it comes to the 5th time. And I'm tired. I'm doing God's work. Come on. And I'm tired. And so I hear Abby start to cry, and I start to get out of bed, but then I feel Jackie move. So I'm like, oh, what's she gonna do? Right? But I mean, come on, man. My wife is pregnant. So I did what any husband would do. I rolled over and I pretended like I was asleep. That's wrong. Because I was trying to position myself on the Tempur-Pedic just a little bit better. Make my pregnant wife get up out of bed in the middle of the night. Some of you guys are like, how could you even come to Adventure Church? I repented, I promise. But we end up using our relationships to try to put us in a better position when we're operating in the world's ways. Number 2, if you're taking notes, jot this down. Well, not only do we use our relationships, but we also undermine our relationships. Now, I think kids just get this 100%. Let me talk to you again about Abby. Abby is our spirited baby. And a couple months ago, we pulled up into a gas station, and I got out to get gas, and Abby had asked Jackie for a piece of her protein bar. And Jackie said, no, baby, we're getting ready to eat dinner in a little bit, so you know how that goes. And it was, shot her down. And so Daddy gets back in the car, and I hear a little voice in the background, Dad. And that's how she says it too, Dad. I said, what? Can I have a piece? I should have asked, why are you whispering, right? But I said, yeah, absolutely, you can have a piece, right? So I gave her a piece. And the moment she got that piece, you know what she said? Mommy. I was like, what? This girl used her dad to undermine her mom. That's rough. I'm telling you, listen, when you have kids, like, the sinful nature is a vivid reality every single day. It's amazing. But we use our relationships to undermine one another. So look what the disciples said. When they found this out, they weren't too happy. Look what they said here. They said that, verse 24, when the 10 heard about this, they were indignant with the 2 brothers. Because they're sitting here thinking, they're like, man, what's going on? Like, how are you going to use your family to try to get over on us? Like, so you're going to try to undermine and put yourself in that position? Like, how are you going to do that? But here's the irony of it, is in the midst of all of this fighting and all of this quarreling, the reason why they were so upset is because they wanted to be first. And they're probably just upset because they don't have family to manipulate either. And so they're like, man, how are you trying to pull this over on us? How are you trying to use your family and undermining us for that position, while at the same time, they're like, no, we really want that spot. We want to be first. And I love how Jesus responds, because these guys had no clue what they were asking. They had no idea what they were asking. And Jesus responds to them in verse 22, and he says this. He says, man, you guys have no idea what you're asking, Jesus said to them. Can you drink the cup I am about to drink? Now, this cup that Jesus was talking about was a cup of suffering. This cup that Jesus was talking about was the cross that was shortly ahead. This was the cup of God's wrath that would be poured out upon him as he stood in the gap for you and I as a substitutionary sacrifice for our sin. And so he says, come on, guys, like, you don't even know what you're asking. And you know what their response was? Look at their response. They said, oh, no, we're good. They said this. They said, no, we're able. We're totally able. Like, we get it. We're gonna fight for first. We're gonna fight with you, Jesus. We're gonna roll. We want to rule and reign with you. We're gonna fight right alongside of you because we too want to be first. And they were just missing the whole picture. We want to fight with you. We want to be first. We want to fight for first. And so Jesus said to them, verse 23, he said this. He said, you indeed will drink from my cup, but to sit at my right or left is not for me to grant. And he goes on to say, that is only for my Father to decide. And so it's interesting that Jesus says this, because they weren't going to drink from the cup of suffering as a substitutionary for their sins, but they were going to drink a cup of suffering that would glorify God by the way they lived their life. Now, it's pretty profound, because Jesus knew something that they didn't know. Jesus could see something that they couldn't see. See, Jesus knew that in just a little while, just a little ways down the road, that these two disciples were going to catch it. He knew that in Acts chapter 12 that James was going to be slaughtered for his relationship with Jesus. He knew that John, risking his life as Jesus was enduring the cross, would stay by his side the entire time, considering his life nothing as it was at risk. Jesus knew something that they didn't know. See, he knew that John, as they tried to boil him in hot oil, when that didn't work, they exiled him to the island of Patmos, where they tried to conceal John from preaching the gospel, from telling people about Jesus. But that's the place that God chose to reveal the book of Revelation to John. And so when people try to conceal, God said, that's perfect. I'm just going to use this to reveal. Amen. It's amazing how God works. See, he knew something that they didn't know, that they were going to catch this reality that he so wanted them to grasp. And so here's the hope, is that in relationships right now, if you're failing, if you're bombing at every angle, here's the hope, is it's not too late. You can still catch it. If you feel like, man, I'm just missing it, I'm blowing it relationally, you can still catch it. Now, I know what you're asking. You're saying, well, what in the world did they catch? Like, what is this that I need to catch so bad? So finally, Jesus, as they're fighting back and forth over who's going to be first and what's going to happen, he huddles all of them together. He says, come on, guys, come on, let's huddle up. You guys don't know what you're doing. And he begins to talk to them. He says, hey, you know the Romans? You know how they use and abuse their authority? You know how because of their position and their power, they, rather than serving people and using that as a platform to help people, they use that authority to use people. They use that authority to undermine people. And you know how they're making so many choices and they're making so many decisions, and they have no idea of the ramifications and the different aspects of their choices. They don't understand the things that they're doing. He says, you know how they treat the people, how they're unfair and how they abuse them at every level? Jesus said, that's not to be of you. That's not to be who you are. Look what Jesus says right here. As he gathers them together, he said, listen, You know how they act, but not so with you. Instead, whoever wants to become great among you must become your servant. And whoever wants to be first must be slave of all or last. Now, this is the place, and this is a passage. If you grew up in church, this passage becomes kind of poetic. It kind of becomes like, listen, if you want to be great, you got to become last. Right? If you want to be first, you got to be last. And we sing about it. We declare those things. We start making up words like greatness equals lastness, and right? Start changing our vocabulary. But then Jesus goes on and he begins to reveal what he wanted them to catch. And this is where I need us to lean in. Verse 45, he says this: "For even the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve and to give his life as a ransom for many." The Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve and give his life as a ransom for many. This is where I need all of us to lean in for a moment. If you don't hear anything else that I say tonight, just kind of lean in on this one. If the Son of God, in all of his glory, majesty, beauty, entitlement, steps out of heaven into time, into bodily form as a servant with the purpose of reconciling relationships, with the purpose of reconciling you and me back to himself, the purpose of reconciling our relationships with one another. If this was the King of Kings strategy when it comes to relationships, to serve and to give, don't you think we need to lean into that a little bit more when it comes to our strategy in regards to our relationships? Like we need to lean into that reality that if this was the strategy that the Son of God, the King of Kings said, this is how relationships work, then man, we need to dive into that. We need to lean into that reality that maybe, just maybe, it's not about being first. Maybe that's just not the goal. Maybe it's not about being first. Maybe, just maybe, it's about living last. If you're taking notes, jot this down. Because here's the truth, that if we want our relationships to last, we have to become last in our relationships. Let me say that one more time. If we want our relationships to last, we have to become last in our relationships. Now, there are some areas that you don't have to be last. Like if you're playing for the Raiders, please don't be last, right? If you have a competitive spirit about you and you just love to compete and all this stuff, man, that's great, man, do that. But when it comes to our relationships, if what you're doing is affecting your relationship in such a detrimental way because of your selfishness and because you're trying to get your needs met and all these things, it's in that place that God says, no, that's not to be you. That's where I've called you not to be first. That's where I've called you to live last. And we struggle with this, don't we? Like, you know, like we can leave here and we're like, yeah, live last and God is like servant, right? Then you get on the freeway and there's not even any traffic. But you know that poor little person who forgot to get over in their lane before the exit realizes that they're, you know, a day late and $1 short and tries to move over into your lane. And you know that feeling. You act like you don't see him, right? And rather than letting him over, we just kind of hit that gas a little bit like, you are not cutting into my lane. I'm not, and we think that's the devil. Like we do. We start quoting scripture like, Satan, get behind me. The Bible says, get behind me, Satan, right? Not out in front of me, get behind me.
I like that. That's a good one. That's good.
Right? It's the truth. Because there's no way that I'm going to live last. No way. It's your bad that you didn't, pace yourself right. But I got somewhere to be. And no way are you going to cut over into my lane. No way are you going to be first. We struggle with living last. Like you don't have to fight for that. You don't have to fight. It's like you didn't go like, oh man, I just can't wait for somebody to cut in front of me, right? Like, you don't have to fight for that. We always want to fight for first. But on our relationships, God's called us to live last. Now, as a church, I know some of you guys are thinking like, oh man, like, tell me something I don't know. Another message on serving, relationships. But here's the tension. The tension is that we may know this. Now, if you're not a Christian tonight, you get a pass on this one. Some of you are like, man, am I saved? I'm not even sure. I ain't saved tonight. I ain't saved tonight. Man, see, trying to be first. Man. But we know this. But here's where the tension lies, is the same statistics that are in the world is the same statistics in the church. So this isn't something that we don't know. But the way we live still says that we are fighting every single day to be first in our relationships. Like, I know this, but I still want to be first. And here's the sad part, is I know it may not feel like it, especially after the holidays. You probably dealt with some family members that were really just, oh, I got to see them every year, multiple times. God's testing you, right? Trials and tribulations. But I think that the heartbreaking part is your marriages, your single life, your families, the relationships and people that you have right here at Adventure Church, with people right here at Adventure Church. I need you to really hear me on this. There are so many blessings behind those relationships. But the problem is, many of us never get to experience those blessings because we're using the wrong key. There's so many blessings behind our marriages, behind our relationships. There's so many blessings, but many of us are trying to open up that door with the key of first. When God is saying that's not the key. God is saying, no, it's not the key of first, it's the key of last. You're using the wrong key. I know this is a first conference, but if your life is gonna be right with God, and if you're gonna experience God's best, if you want to be first, God's saying that's cool, but let me just show you how that works. You have to live last. You have to live last. And it's hard for us even to hear that, like, oh man. And I ask myself the question, why do we wrestle with that so much? Why is it so hard for us to live last? And I think it boils down to one word, and if you're taking notes, you can jot this word down, and I think it's the word sacrifice. It's the word sacrifice. We don't like this word. Because this word says, no, you're not gonna cut me on the freeway. I got an agenda. You're gonna start messing with my time in this realm of sacrifice. Right? You're gonna start messing with my plans and my needs and my pleasures and my fulfillment. And let's be honest, sacrifice, that requires this V word, vulnerability. Like, I don't wanna be vulnerable. Like, you wanna put me in that spot? Like, no. And here's the sad part is, none of us live, or none of us would say that this is who we are. None of us would come out and say, yeah, I'm selfish and prideful, and just wanted the world to know that I love to be first, right? None of us say that, but we live our lives in such a way that declares that to everybody around us, and everybody around you, don't look at your neighbor, will say yes and amen. Right? They would say, man, we live our lives in such a way where people who know you are like, oh, you are not living last ever. And then I know there's some that are just like, well, I'm always last. Right? I want to be first once in a while. And that's cool. But here's the deal. I'm going to open myself up in a way that if I choose to live last, it's going to be so vulnerable. Like, people might hurt me because of this word. Yeah, it's true. You mean, but Pastor Matt, if I start to live last and sacrifice, man, people are gonna start taking advantage of me. Yep, definitely will. Man, if I start paying attention to this word, then I'm gonna put myself in such a vulnerable place that my reputation and you know, I kind of got a little persona to keep up. I got a little bit of a swag that I gotta make sure is protected. Like you're messing with my swag now with this sacrifice. Yep. Welcome to being a follower of Jesus. It's this word, and here's what I know to be true. And if you're taking notes, you got to jot this down. That the sacrifices of today lead to the blessings of tomorrow. You got to hear that one more time. The sacrifices of today lead to the blessings of tomorrow. And some of you, you're missing out on so much blessing because you're not willing to sacrifice. And you're trying to open up all these doors and it's just not working because you're using the wrong key. And now hear me out. Some of you guys would be saying like, well, no, I love being first. But isn't it crazy that even when we're first, it doesn't work? You can be first in everything. You could put yourself first. You could be the most selfish person. You could have everything you want. And guess what? It still won't be enough. Because that's not the way you were built. See, if that was the case, your life wouldn't be built to last, but the way God has designed you is in such a way that you are built to last, but the only way you are gonna last is if you start to learn how to live last. Because that's how God has wired you. You never be fulfilled as long as you're always trying to be first. It doesn't work. It's not real. That's not the way that God has designed you. It's not the way God has designed you. So let me just give you one takeaway. One takeaway, and we're gonna kind of land the plane in just a moment. What happens when we choose to live last? All right, Pastor Matt, like I hear what you're saying. I need to live last. Well, what happens in that place? What does that look like? If you're taking notes, you're not gonna wanna miss this one. Is when you and I learn to live last, when we choose to live last, something very special happens. And that's that we begin to preserve our relationships. As I was preparing for this, I kind of tripped out because you notice that the root word of preserve is serve. And so it's almost like if we want our relationships to be preserved, we have to learn how to serve, because if we serve, then they're gonna be preserved. You know what I'm saying? We gotta learn, we gotta understand this, that when we choose to live last, that our relationships will be preserved. Now I wanna tell you a story. It's a very well-known story in the Bible. I don't have time to get into all of the details, but it's the story of Esther. You can go back and read it on your own. Great story. And we're not gonna get to the text yet, but let me give you just kind of a quick picture of her life. Now Esther was living in a kingdom under the king by the name of King Xerxes. He oversaw about 127 provinces that stretched from India to Ethiopia. Now, because Esther's parents had died, she was adopted by her cousin Mordecai. Now, a lot of times when we read Bible stories, we kind of think like, oh, okay, cool, her parents died, she was adopted, like Esther's awesome and amazing. No, her life was rough. Esther was constantly living a life of last. She felt like everything had been taken from her, everything had been stripped from her. She has no parents. I mean, the life of an orphan is not easy. It was difficult. So she gets adopted by her cousin Mordecai. Long story short, King Xerxes has some relational issues of his own. Like King Xerxes needed to be in this message. Straight up. And so he invites his wife to come to a party. And his wife's name is Vashti, and she declines. They had some communication issues. Remember what I said, how it... But King Xerxes, what he does is he says, man, oh, you think I'm gonna live last? No, I'm first. And he banishes her from the kingdom. Like some of y'all wish you could just banish people, right? You just wish that you could say, we're not communicating. Oh, you don't wanna come to my party. You don't wanna meet my needs. You don't want, banished. It's just never that easy for her, so, right? And he banishes her from the kingdom, and And so he starts to get a little bit lonely, so he launches this beauty pageant, or I like to say it's the first season of The Bachelor, Bachelorette. And so he launches this kingdom-wide beauty pageant, and he's going through all the girls. He's trying to figure out, man, I'm lonely. I'm trying to get some needs met. You know, I need another wife. And he's going through the list, and Esther gets the final rose. She's the one who, out of all the women, he says, you. And so you guys got to lean into this, because here's the very first time for Esther. It's the very first time in her life where she's actually first. She's actually first. Like the king, he picked me, like he chose me. Oh, I'm first. Out of all these beautiful women in this entire kingdom, I am finally first. Well, not only was she first, but now she's famous. She's living in the kingdom, in the palace. She's at the upper echelon of every cultural fad. She's at the pinnacle of the decision-making for the entire known world of her time. I mean, she's in a very high position, so it wasn't like she's just first, like she got drafted to the top. And so that lifestyle, you can get accustomed to that real fast, right? You're enjoying yourself, you're living in luxury, and so she gets word that this man by the name of Haman, who was in second command to the king, she gets this word that he is getting ready to unleash a genocide on the entire Jewish people. Some of you guys could probably preach this message, but I want you to lean into this, because he was getting ready to execute an entire race, a genocide of the entire Jewish race. Why? Because Haman had an issue of being first. There was a time that he really wanted everybody to bow down to him. Everybody, as he kind of came through as second in command to the king, that everybody was supposed to bow down. Well, Mordecai, Esther's cousin, he didn't do that. And so when that happened, Haman said, oh, you don't want to get on my page? You don't want to meet my needs? You don't want to be subject to who I am? He says that I'm going to kill all of you because I'm first. I'm first. So long story short, fast forward, Mordecai gets wind of this. He goes to Esther and he says, hey, Esther, he says, listen, you got to do something about this. And if I could have the worship team come up, he says, you got to do something about this. Because, you know, the worship team comes up, it sounds so much more spiritual, doesn't it? So he said, Esther, man, this guy is going to wipe out our entire race. But the problem is Esther had a couple secrets of her own. Communication. She forgot to tell the king that she's Jewish. How do you forget that? Yeah, how are you? Tell me about your past. Nope. I'm hot. Right? He probably just didn't ask the right questions, so she was like, I ain't gonna tell him. And not only that if she approached the king without being summoned, the consequence would be death. Consequence would be death. And you got to picture this for a moment. Esther's finally first. And now God is calling her to be last. And I felt like this is really where the Lord wanted me to hone in tonight. Because you don't think that this girl wrestled a little bit? She looked at this palace. Everything of what it feels like to finally be first. So finally, after much wrestling, Mordecai said, you got to do it. She said, I'm not going to do it. He said, you got to do it. She said, I'm not going to do it. He said, you got to do it. Finally, she said, okay, I'll tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to take 3 days and we're going to fast and we're going to pray. And after that, I'm going to go. I'm going to go. You see, a lot of times when we think about the story of Esther, we think about this incredible moment and feat for her. But we forget about this reality of Esther, that the enemy was at work and wanted to wipe out an entire generation. An entire generation. See, the enemy is plotted on you and in every single relationship in your life. Because he doesn't want it to thrive. He doesn't want it to work. He doesn't want it to be blessed. He wants to do whatever he can to wreck every single relationship in your life. He's already unleashed that. That's what he wants to do. You know, sometimes we just can't underestimate. I know we don't like to think about it a lot, but man, there's a real war happening. There's a real battle happening. It's funny, when we first took over our church a couple years ago, I was on the phone with Pastor Anthony, and I know that God was using him to speak this to us. And one of the things that he told us was, don't underestimate the spiritual warfare. And I've held on to that because it's real. There's a real battle happening. And it was real for Esther, and she's wrestling between what do I do? And so she says, I'm gonna fast and I'm gonna pray, and we're gonna do this for 3 days as the enemy was unleashing or planning and plotting this horrible attack. And she's wrestling, she's like, I'm first, and I just don't know if I wanna give this up. But we gotta fast. Because Esther knew that something had to break in the spirit. Because she was struggling with this. One thing I love about Esther, she didn't say, okay, great, I'm gonna be last. Gonna live a life of last. No. She says, I don't know. I'm gonna need you for this one, Lord, because I so desperately wanna be first. I so desperately wanna be first. So the story goes, she chose to live a life of last, and a generation was preserved. And I just want you to look at this passage with me real quick of what Esther declared for her life, of the plan. She said this. She says, go gather all the Jews who are in Susa and fast for me. Don't eat or drink for 3 days, night or day. In my attendance, they'll fast as you do. When this is done, I will go to the king, even though it's against the law. And if I perish, then I perish. Esther said, I made a decision that in all of my entitlement to be first, she made a decision to live last, and the result was Haman got dealt with, Mordecai got promoted, and a generation was preserved. A generation was preserved because one woman chose to live last. Now here's the temptation. The temptation is for me to say, hey guys, all right, let's be like Esther. But the chances are none of us are over 127 providences. And the majority of our life is not going to be broadcasted all over the world news and media. But I tell you what, the relationships that God has put in your life, the people that God has put around you, they need to experience this reality. There's some relationships that you know it. Even as I'm speaking, God is telling you, you know in your hearts that God is calling you to be last. And it's a fight, and it's a struggle, and it's a wrestle. But God is speaking that to you. So this is my challenge to you this week. As you're full blown into the first of the year in this first conference. As for many of you, something needs to break in the spirit. Because it's a stronghold of bitterness and resentment and unforgiveness and just you, or just need to get my needs met. I just need, it's me and me. And God's saying, last, so much better, so much better. And so I want to encourage you over this next week, you pick 3 days that you don't have to fast food. But can I just speak to you real quick? If you can fast food, and you're able to do that with doctor's consent. Listen, if you can't say no to a cheeseburger, what makes you think you can say no to an affair? So take just 3 days and say, God, I'm gonna fast and I'm gonna pray because I know there's areas that you're calling me to live last, and something needs to break in the spirit. I want you to ponder this question as you fast, this one question, and you can put that on the board for me. And the question is this: why am I fighting for first? Or let me rephrase this: where am I fighting for first when I should be living last? Where is it? Where is it? And I believe God is going to speak to you. He's going to speak to you in this next week coming up. That as you put yourself in a position to hear from him, he's gonna show you those areas. He's gonna break some things off of your life, and you're gonna feel a release and a freedom that you could have never felt, because it's no longer gonna be about you. It's gonna be about him. And in that place, you're gonna experience blessing. You're gonna unlock some doors that have been shut for so long because you've been using the wrong key. But now God says, no, you got the right one now. The key is last. And if you get discouraged and you just don't understand, how am I gonna do this? I just want you to picture in your mind the King of Kings stepping out of heaven into bodily form, humbling himself as a servant, for forsaking all of his entitlement, emptying him of himself, because he said, you're worth me living last. So anytime you get discouraged, you think about him and you continue to unlock those doors with the right key, and God is gonna do something on the inside of you, and there's gonna be a freedom like you've never known. And the whole time, you're gonna find your needs being met in that process. Because something happens when we worship God. He gets what he deserves, and we get what we need. So Father, in Jesus' name, I'm gonna invite Pastor Anthony to come back up. I know that may not have been super polished tonight, but I know this is a word that you have in store for somebody here tonight, Jesus. So a demonstration of your power tonight in each and every heart, God. That if we can catch this truth and it be real in our lives, there's so much blessing, there's so much freedom, there's so much life, and there's some relationships here tonight. They desperately need somebody to make a decision to live last. So give us the courage, give us the strength. In Jesus' name.
Thanks for listening. We hope you enjoyed today's message. Here at Adventure Community Church, we believe in one step closer. Whether it be one step closer in your relationship with Christ, or one step closer in slaying that Goliath that stands in our way, we believe in the power and person of the Holy Spirit to take us one step closer. That through an intimate prayer life and an understanding of God's word, there is no limit to what God can use us for.